From Amateur Radio Newsline Report, number 1954, these are the Ham Nation headlines for Wednesday, March 4th, 2015. Hams Down Under offered up a quick response after a strong cyclone came ashore. Here's Graham Kemp, VK4BB.
Amateur radio volunteers with Australia's Central Queensland Amateur Radio Association called up emergency response nets on both the HF and VHF bands in the wake of Category 5 Cyclone Marcia that came ripping ashore the weekend of February 20. After making landfall, Marcia swept across Queensland, leaving 1,500 homes damaged, whilst downing trees and power lines. Upwards of 50,000 residents were without electrical mains power, and the cyclone also interrupted several normal lines of communication, including the telephone service. Ham Radio was quick to respond with volunteers from the Central Queensland Amateur Radio Association. At the same time, several Wireless Institute Civil Emergency Network, or WISN groups, were on standby to assist emergency responders if called on to do so. News reports say that Marcia, which packed winds of up to 155 miles an hour when it made landfall, was one of two cyclones which hit northern Australia within hours of one another.
No deaths were reported as a result of either storm, but cleanup efforts and the restoration of electricity in a number of storm-ravaged areas will likely take some time. Amateur Radio Newsline is seeking nominations for its 2015 Young Ham of the Year Award.
For consideration, a nominee must have used amateur radio in some way that has benefited his or her community or encouraged technological development directly or indirectly related to communications. Nominees must be 19 years or younger and reside in the United States, including Hawaii, Alaska, and Puerto Rico, or any of the Canadian provinces. The individual must hold a currently valid United States or Canadian amateur radio license. The award is not a contest. The person selected as Young Ham of the Year is judged on his or her overall accomplishments and contributions. For example, a youngster whose only claim to fame is that of being licensed as an extra at age 5 would not necessarily be judged as having made a significant contribution to the amateur radio service. On the other hand, a 14 or 15-year-old technician running a net during a major disaster or whose experimentation has advanced the state-of-the-art in science or technology would definitely be given consideration.
That's Jim Dameron, N8TMW. You'll find complete details on our website, arnewsline.org. Just click the YHOTY button. A record-holding U.S. astronaut has renewed his ham license. Astronaut Michael Fink, KE5AIT, recently renewed his amateur radio license through February 18, 2025. Fink served on ISS Expedition 9 from April 18 to October 23 of 2004, as well as Expedition 18 that began October 12, 2008 and ended April 8, 2009. His last venture into space was on STS-134, the flight of the Space Shuttle Endeavour. That mission ran May 16 to June 1, 2011 and delivered the Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer and an Express Logistics Carrier to the International Space Station. At 381.6 days, KE5AIT currently holds the American record for the most time in space. And finally this week, if you have an older analog shortwave broadcast transmitter lying around and are wondering what to do with it, just ask the Voice of America. They found a novel use for one of their own and have created a program for it, as we hear from Kim Andrew Elliott, KD9XB.
VOA Radiogram has broadcast its 100th program. VOA Radiogram is an experimental Voice of America program on which digital text modes familiar to amateur radio are transmitted on a 50-year-old analog AM shortwave broadcast transmitter in North Carolina. The idea is that shortwave radio can be used to communicate text and images when the Internet is disrupted by dictators, disasters, or other factors. In the early weeks of VOA Radiogram, digital modes were tested side by side, including the various flavors of BPSK, QPSK, MT63, Olivia, and Thor. Reports have been received from shortwave listeners and radio amateurs throughout Europe and North America, as well as Latin America and Asia, and even from New Zealand, 14,000 kilometers from the transmitter. Ultimately, it was MFSK that worked best on the shortwave broadcast transmitter. Furthermore, MFSK can be used to transmit images as well as text. Digital text works on any existing shortwave transmitter with no modifications necessary, and it can be received on any radio, including cheap portables with no sideband capability. For more information about the program, including the transmission schedule, visit the website voaradiogram.net.
And that's all from the Amateur Radio Newsline, your independent source for amateur radio news for over 37 years and counting at www.arnewsline.org. For Graham Kemp, VK4BB, Jim Dameron, N8TMW, and Kim Andrew Elliott, KD9XB, I'm Don Wellbanks, AE5DW, 73. We'll see you next time here on Ham Nation.